Hey, NCC, Pastor Todd here, and welcome to chapel. I am obviously in my car, but I'm at a cemetery, actually not too far from NCC, and the reason why was many years ago. I remember being here during a funeral, and a friend of mine had passed away, and his wife had asked me to play the guitar at the gravesite, and with this gathering of people, and had asked that I play a song called "How He Loves Us" by Dave Crowder Band, and it was just kind of this weird moment. We're playing a worship song at a funeral, and so as I'm playing, and I remember really just over there, and seeing his wife just crying, and as I'm playing this song, and part of me was thinking maybe I should stop playing this song, and but at the same time listening to the words and thinking back that perhaps it was a very apropos song to sing. It was very appropriate for the time of how Jesus loves us, and as I'm looking at this woman who's now a widow, and as she's crying, and her best friend is gone, and so it made me think of this passage I want to share with you today, from the Gospel of Luke, in chapter 7, verses 11 to 17, about really Jesus does this firsthand of kind of what I was describing at this gravesite, this moment. And it says that soon after, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. And as he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. So as Jesus is traveling from one town to another, this town called Nain, he has his 12 disciples with him, and he's got this huge crowd that's following him because they want to hear Jesus teach more and perform many more miracles. And just as Jesus is walking into this town, there's a funeral procession coming out that's being led by this woman who was a widow, the story tells us, and now her only son is dead, and there's this large crowd that's with her, and so you would think that this large crowd is there to support her, and that it's extended family and friends, but that's not the case. It's actually kind of weird when you look into the culture at the time, is that a lot of these people that would be a part of the funeral processions were paid to be there. They were paid mourners. They would be almost like actors, paid to come alongside and follow the coffin and cry and cry loudly, and to just kind of pour themselves out and weep, and so there would be this large crowd of paid actors following this woman as she would have led the procession. And her husband had passed away, we don't know how long ago, but now her only son has passed away. And this is so extremely significant. Like these stories that the Bible gives us that we can really immerse ourselves in and picture, we can actually almost lean in to feel what she's feeling. And that they would have believed in that culture, they would have believed that she had committed some horrible sin. There's some horrible thing that she has done to deserve her husband passing away, and then her only son. Like some awful calamity is in her life, and so she's alone, and she is mourning. And so this woman that's leading out this funeral procession is alone. She's all by herself, and the crowd is not there to support her. They're paid actors, and then she's carrying the shame of perhaps this, she's done something to deserve all of this pain. So you can imagine maybe how she feels. You could probably even imagine what she looks like, and just weeping and mourning and struggling with all this grief here in this moment. But then the Bible says, and then when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said, "Do not weep." And then he came up and he touched the bier, which is not a coffin. It's like a imagine them carrying like a couch where this dead body is laid on. And as Jesus approaches this bier, it says everybody stops. All the pallbearers stop, the crowd stops, and they look at Jesus, and Jesus says to the young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. And now fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him spread throughout the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country. So Jesus did the unthinkable in a lot of different ways here in this moment. And by approaching this coffin, like would have been an absolute no-no. It was, again, in this culture that if you had... like you're not to go near anything that is dead, let alone a person who's dead. That's why they're walking outside of the city, because you didn't want to bury a dead person within the city walls and within the city gates. So had to be taken to somewhere outside the city. And so Jesus did the unthinkable in approaching this bier, this kind of open coffin, and he speaks to a dead man. So just by approaching it, he stopped the whole crowd, and now everybody is looking at him, and he speaks to this young man, and he says, young man, I say to you, arise. Like, he speaks to a dead man. Like, Jesus obviously knows something that no one else there in the crowd knows, but you have this huge amount of people now staring at Jesus and what he's doing. And the young man gets up, begins to speak, really proves that he's alive, and then Jesus tenderly takes this young man and hands him to his mother. And it is Mother's Day this weekend, so I think this is also a very appropriate story for right now too, of Jesus's love for this mom. And the part that sticks out to me the most is just these words. It says, and when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her. In the midst of a crowd, of this journey of Jesus moving from one place to another place, he sees this woman in her pain. He sees her in her shame. He sees how alone she is. He sees her in her grief, and he has compassion on her, and it moves him to action. He doesn't come over to her and say, hey, listen, you need to know your son is in a better place. It's not what Jesus did. He came over and he relieved her pain. He said to her, do not weep, which is a crazy thought, really, in the midst of all of this. What else would you do in this moment but weep? And then he gave her a reason not to weep anymore. And he raised her son to life and then gave him to his mother. The details of Jesus giving this boy to his mother, it underscores the whole purpose of his intervention. It's really like the Jesus bringing good news to this woman. And so a couple of things I just want to point out really quickly is that we see the sovereignty of God in all this. I wholeheartedly believe that God is in control of all things at all times. I believe he is all powerful. I believe God is all knowing, and that he is really everywhere at once. And those things are really hard for me to grasp. I don't know about you, but I know some of you guys have done grade 12 bio, and when I hear you talk about that, I'm like, no, I can't even process some of that stuff. But even the characteristics and nature of God, sometimes you just kind of left overwhelmed and in awe of who he is. And in this moment and in this story, we see the sovereignty of God, that this was not just by chance that Jesus was walking into this city, that there was a divine appointment Jesus had with a woman who was in grief and in pain and alone and carrying this heavy burden of shame. And he knew everything that was going on, and he had this divine appointment to be there at this specific time to meet with her and to relieve her pain. And we also see in this story the heart of Jesus. We see the heart of God on display in the Son, that is Jesus. I don't know about you, but I remember growing up, I had a really hard time distinguishing between God and Jesus, and understanding that Jesus is God, and does one have a different heart than the other, and is God just the one that punishes and Jesus is the nice guy? And in this story, we kind of see that wonderful collision in the sovereignty of God and his control of all things. And then we see his heart for people, his heart for you, and his heart for me, and his heart for this woman. The Bible tells us that Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and that he upholds the universe by the word of his power. And his heart is evident here in this passage. The heart of God through the Son, Jesus, is evident. That he had compassion. He had compassion. And in this instance, as in so many others, Jesus' works, his works of wonder and his miracles, they don't come from a distinct purpose to offer credentials to his mission, but from the overflow of his infinite sympathy for human suffering. Jesus was moved by compassion, and he was moved to action. His motive wasn't simply pity. His purpose wasn't merely to comfort a desolate woman whose hope and love and defense were lying stretched out in her boy's coffin. Listen, Jesus was showing the heart of God here in this story. He has a concern for, and he is moved with compassion for those who mourn, and for those who are miserable, and for those who are feeling like they're without hope, and those who are in despair. He cares about them. If you're carrying some sense of shame, he cares about you. See, the same in this story goes for us, is that our suffering is significant to us. Our suffering is significant to us. Just like this widow. See, God knows the depths of her pain and her misery, and God knows the depths of your pain and your misery. And maybe throughout this lockdown, throughout the last 14 months, it's been really up and down and really crazy. But we need to remember that God knows exactly what we're going through, and he's made a divine appointment to be with us in our pain and in our misery. If we think at some point in time along this, what have I done to deserve this? God is there. He's there in his Son, Jesus, and he will either relieve you of this pain now, or he's going to keep us in it and relieve us at some other time. And we can put our hope in the fact that he is present no matter what in the here and now. And either that relief is going to come shortly or it's going to come at a later date, but both are significant because both are equally the works of a powerful God who has the power, who has the divine power to speak into our moments and say, arise. So just as powerful, I think, in this story is to see the Son of God come and intervene and care, and for a woman who's in her deepest point of despair and misery and shame and pain. But he also speaks life into dead people. And he did that to her through her Son. As he says, arise to him, and that gave life to them both. So right now, listen, guys, if you're in that place of misery, if you're in that place of pain and despair, know for a fact by stories like this that Jesus cares and is present, and he has made a divine appointment to meet you right where you're at right now. God bless you guys. Praying for you all the time.